to accept such a ticket or such an invitation to a court, that to me would be a trespass as I see it, as I comprehend the system. And so the way I stay out of all that is I simply don't agree to any of it. And I have been very vigilant in this community and beyond this community in informing the legal actors of all of this situation. And since that time, the patrols are way down, the engagements are way down, the revenue activities are way down within my local areas and just outside of them. And I travel about in a conveyance without tags, without insurance. None of these things I can have because it would require my agreement to accept offers from the legal matrix using what you refer to as surety for the bankrupted franchise, which is another way of saying the legal name. And so thus far, I've had no problem. I've done many interviews with people who do the same. Sometimes they get into situations in which they're arrested and imprisoned, but they get out pretty quick as long as they don't agree to act as surety for the bankrupted franchise, the legal person. So I just wanted to put that in so you know where I'm coming from in specific in the way I'm currently proceeding. I know you have perhaps an alternative method of going about living here, and looking really forward to hearing more about that.
Okay, great. Well, let me comment and direct some conversation about that. Very, very key and important elements to look at and to understand. First of all, before we started, Jolly, you had mentioned you wanted to bring the conversation to what we do as Gemstone, Gemstone University. And so just briefly, because this kind of lays the foundation for the conversation in addressing those points, I and my wife founded Pantera de Oro as a private society in 2001, early 2002. And I continued to build my base of knowledge from that early point. We made several attempts, and actually prior to that, we were trying to build essentially the same structure from the mid-90s onward, essentially building a private society, a private membership organization, and establishing it on several key points. One, education, primarily education, and supporting the members to grow in that education and progressively and eventually being able to, one of our goals for a very long time was to create complete vertical integration to control all the elements in our lives, and primarily in the financial and the banking arena, and be able to understand how to create structures that were completely private and protected so that they couldn't be controlled by the public side. And some might say, well, isn't that slightly saying a polarity like what you talked about earlier? You're private, they're public, et cetera. No, it's understanding both sides and understanding how to stand where you want to stand and literally use kind of like the old proverbial phrase, be in the world but not of it. Well, how do we do that? The world that it's saying be in but not of is that world of the system, how to use it, how to direct it, like I said earlier, but not be attached to it. That's how we want to be. That's how standing as private, how that plays in, which we'll elaborate on further in a little bit. But so we started that mid-90s into the early 2000s, established the private society based on education and progressively integrating vertical integration, all elements of the solution. And then we birthed, well, before I say that, just to say for 15 years, we had many attempts, trial and error to create this. And we came together, we learned things, it fell apart, we came together again, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, about 4 or 5 years ago, we got to a point where we had a much more stable grounding really within ourselves, because we had gone through those layers of dealing with ourselves, dealing with the enemy construct, the separation, all that. Not that we finished doing that. I expect to be doing that for a long time to come, but sufficiently to where there was a balance and a stability, and that reflected in our manifested reality. People started showing up who were much more substantial and capable of staying and building together. So we have been building Pantera for the last 5-6 years, and finally manifesting what we set out to do like 20 years ago. And so out of that, one of the key things that we intended always to do was to birth a university, and now that's called Gemstone University. And we only work with our members in the private. We do not, if you're not a member of our society, then we don't interact with you in terms of getting into the depths of everything. And there's a reason for that, and a big part of it is protection, to stay private so that we're not in the public. And so Gemstone is basically configured in 3 ways. The entry point is general education, which is the whole spectrum of everything that we're talking about. Then there are 2 premium courses. One is called the estate structure, and one is called status correction. The estate structure is about how to hold our purpose and mission and intention into a private structure that also has a multi-layered structuring that can and does include being able to interact in the public, to be in commerce through entities that we create if and as we need to it, but also to more and more can build things privately, where we're building literally a private economy, where we're not having to go back into the public system. We're not there by a long shot, but that is where we're directing forward going, so that we can progressively build essentially a private economy that's not built on fiat currency or on monetized debt or bonded surety structures and all the other elements of war and commerce. And so in the historical continuum of law, money, and history, the sovereign, the king or the crown, was the only one who actually was allowed to own the land. And it goes back to divine right of kings, and which meant that the gods gave favor to a specific bloodline, and that became the kingship, and only the kings could control the land. The parallel to that, of course, was that the priests controlled the temple, which controlled the law and bound the people to that law. And that's basically the world construct: the line of the king to control the land, the line of the priest to control the law and bind the people to that law. And so along the lines in that, the structure of landed estates emerged. And that was the relationship in the feudal system, which we're still in, by the way, where the king granted land and issued it made that grant patent. And once it was patent, whether from a pope or a king, then it was irrevocable and was the highest level of land hold that was possible. So a land grant made patent had a reciprocation, which was an oath of fealty from the land holder, who became the lord of that land, the landlord. And that oath of fealty or loyalty was a reciprocation that if the sovereign, his lords, to provide something for the realm, whether that was men, arms, food, taxes, whatever, that they were required to do that. So that was the basic construction. And then, they went down hierarchically to others who were given estates. And so property has always been held as an estate. And the understanding of that is very important. So this is why we have one of our primary advanced courses is the estate structure. And it's not just a course just to learn information. It's actually the doing, how to reproduce the model that we've created to embody and hold through an estate structure your vision, your purpose, your mission. Specifically our members who we guide through this process, to create a new estate that's free and clear of the bonded structure of our other estates. What is our other estate? Our other estate is when we're born. We do have a lineal estate. It's an ancestral estate. Ultimately, in the physical sense, that is actually our DNA, our genetic lineage. That's the only place where, you know, if you look at a vertical line as who you are standing in eternity, because you're here, you've always been here in life, you're standing on that vertical line, and it's outside of time. That is, you know, that's your eternal being, your eternal presence. The crossbar, the horizontal, is your journey through time. But we come into a life, we take on a body, we live that life through time, and then we die, we leave it. The being, the eternal essence, remains. It's always been here. But the embodiment does what? It takes on a landed estate in the physical, and the lineage that we inherit from that physical timeline is our DNA. And so, and I can't obviously, I mean, this is something we teach people. It takes months and literally years to really understand and get your head around. But in the just boiling it down to the essential points is that when you really get down to it and you peel back the layers, the entire relationship to what you're calling, rightfully so, the name, is really another form of an estate. And in the legal monetary taxation world, that's called a decedent estate. And by definition in law, a decedent is, most people would say, well, what's a decedent? Well, it's when somebody dies. But if you look up in a law dictionary, a decedent means dying. And remember, I said earlier, we live in we exist in a cult of death. We live in life, but we have projected and allowed ourselves to be attached to a cult of death. And so the minute we're born, we start dying. And how do we die? We allow our life force to be monetized into that death system, and progressively it literally eats away at the substance of our life embodied in these physical bodies until basically the bodies wither and die. And that's a decedent estate. And this is hardwired into the tax system, the IRS system. Under the IRS codes, you will find this, you know, decedent and everything else that I described. And so the second premium course that we have is called status correction, because what happens when we're born is a number of things. I mean, within the first, you were very busy with the first 3 to 7 days you were born. You didn't realize that you were born into life, and then you were lost at sea, and then your mother registered you to become part of the royal registry of the crown, and then the state took you on as a ward of the state because you were lost at sea, and then they invoked maritime rules of claim and salvage, and they salvaged the abandoned estate. And yeah, I'm trying to rattle all these key pieces off. And then the state, as a ward, you were a foundling because your patrimony was not cognized. It wasn't recognized. What's the patrimony? It's the paternal genetics that you have in your body. But when the living baby is born, what comes out next is what's called the afterbirth, which is the placenta. The placenta is alive when it is expelled from the mother, but of course, obviously, dies. You know, it depends on being attached to the mother through the uterus, and through that, the baby is nourished for the 9 months. The baby comes out alive, can be cut. The cord can be cut, can be obviously stay alive in most cases, but the placenta dies, and the placenta only has maternal genetics in it. There's no patrimony, there's no paternal genetic line, and so they claim and salvage that stillbirth. And there's actually sites in the legal system, in sites in cases, court citations, that say that anything that comes out of the mother is considered a human. And so that becomes the dead fiction that they claim the genetics because it was also abandoned, and that becomes a decedent estate. And if we do not claim that estate, and if we do not return from the presumption of death, because, you know, this goes back to other constructions in the last 300-400 years about being lost at sea and what's called the Cesta KV Act, which I'll get into in a minute, then we're considered lost at sea and the estate is abandoned. So then all estates hold property, and all estates have an executor. So the state, all capital letter state, steps in as the proxy executor to control the estate. And so we have abandoned that. If we don't come back, prove that we have returned from being lost at sea,